All right, and now it's time to look at what is arguably one of the best tools in Excel. That's the pivot table. In the next two modules, we're going to go from learning what a pivot table is to putting some really advanced things in a pivot table, like table calculations, conditional formatting, multiple data points. In this lesson, it's just going to be a really brief overview of what a pivot table is, so you don't even have to get onto a tab in the worksheet or anything. Just watch along as I show you some examples of some good pivot tables. Okay, so let's first look at the Bakery Shop tab. This is a table full of data, and it's a little over 100 rows. Not a ton, but even with over 100 rows, it's a lot to analyze all at once. Unless we know a specific formula, then we may not be able to draw out the best conclusion. It'd be really, really nice if we had a very quick and easy way to analyze this data. And that's what pivot tables are. So let's first look at a very simple bakery sales pivot table. Let's look at the components of the pivot table. Along the left, you have rows, and right now in this pivot table, they have the list of the items that are in our bakery shop. These are all the items that can be sold. And then across the top, you have locations of where they can be sold. And in the intersection, or in the middle, you have a summary of everything that was sold in that store. So at every intersection of a product and a location, you have a sum of the number of items sold without having to do a lot of formulas and functions. At the bottom, you have grand totals. As you do at the last column, you have grand totals there too. Another thing the pivot table does is it puts these little arrows, little drop downs in for you, so I can actually isolate a couple products. If I just want to see cakes and cookies, I can click that, and it filters down really quickly. Or I can bring them all back. And I'm looking at all the days. Up top here, this is actually the filters area. I'm filtering by day. Right now I'm showing all the days, but I could just pick individual days to see what the sales were for that day. That's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then if I want to see them all again, I can just click all up here. So this summarizes all that data. And again, we're working with a table that has a little over 100 rows. What if you're working with thousands of rows? This is an invaluable tool for doing analysis on your data. So let's go now to totals and subtotals and see what happens there. So here's an example where we're using a different data set for this one, but instead of just having one item here on the left and then one item across the top, which are months, we have a little icon here that's a plus or minus. That means we can drill into the data. So for this one, for Bright Dog, we had 680 sales in March, 4327 in April. If I click that little plus sign, it opens up to all the product categories and products that were sold to make up that summary. So this is what's known as drilling into or drilling down into the data. We're going through our customer and getting a category level and a product level breakdown of all the sales. And in addition to just clicking that, you can actually double click on any subheadings if you want to quote unquote roll them up. That's the terminology that's used when you actually aggregate things up to a higher level. I can double click that. If I want to have it all expanded, I can right click on that and go to expand and collapse, and I can expand the entire field, and that opens everything up. Likewise, I can right click and collapse the entire field. Another thing that we can do with pivot tables that we're going to learn how to do, multiple data points. So in the couple pivots I've showed you, there's just been one data point here. If we come down here, we have just the total sales here. But if I want multiple data points, I can come over here and I can have the minimum of sales, the maximum of sales, the average. I can add multiple different ways to look at that data. Instead of just being a sum or a count, I can do averages, minimums, maximums. Let's go over to slicers and timelines. On slicers and timelines, what we have is we have a pivot table that has a lot of detail here, and this pivot table actually scrolls off the page. So instead of just using the drop downs for filters, we have these really interesting interactive controls called slicers. And I can click on customer names and it will filter down to the customer name. Or I can click on employees, basically anything I want filters on, I can make a slicer out of. And it also has timelines. We can go through multiple quarters. We can change that back to just months and just click on individual months, or I can highlight and do several months if I want. These are things that make the pivot table really interactive. And then finally, we'll come to conditional formatting. And that's where we looked at the conditional formatting we did earlier, but apply it to pivot tables. Put those data bars on cells so you can see at a glance which values are the biggest. I can go over and put the indicator icons on values or apply a heat map to it. So basically that's what a pivot table is. It's a way to summarize data, a big table of data, in a smaller way to view to make it really easy to do your analysis. And in these two modules, we're going to learn how to build a pivot table from scratch and apply all these interesting and fun techniques to it. Let's get started.